I think it is probably a good time now to move to our next slot in the agenda, and that is beginning to get our hands a little more dirty with what the different components of the enable process look like. First is the DNA, the design needs analysis. So this is more of a project team approach to presenting this to you today and to engaging you in discussion about that. And I know there are some colleagues in the room today who took part in DNAs already. So I'll leave it to Andy to facilitate this bit, to introduce the DNA, and then give colleagues who have already done it an opportunity to share what they've experienced so far, on the basis that they haven't done the actual enable workshop just yet, but they have done the DNA. So Andy, do you want to take the lead on that?
Yeah, I can do. So just there's at the moment we seem to be doing a lot of pre-DNA meetings. So I'm just trying to find the meeting, because there's a lot of them. So let us try and kind of like demystify what the DNA meeting is all about. So in the DNA meeting, the aim of the DNA meeting is just to have that initial conversation with you about what is it you'd like to get from the enable process. And we would ask you to complete within that. We would work through an enable pro forma with you to highlight those key areas. So there is a bit of a need within that to perhaps do a bit of a pre-think about what you'd want. The DNA meeting is not an event for everybody. It's about the core team members, the course leaders that need to come, just to give the facilitator that overview of, if you like, how the land lies and what you want your facilitation event to, your enable workshop to actually look like. So I know we're doing this off the cuff a little bit, but Stephen, would you like to, I know we've all done a couple each, so perhaps what we could do is just share our initial experiences of actually running a DNA from our side, and perhaps Stephen and Ali perhaps just quickly come back in on that. And then what we can then do is ask a couple of colleagues that have been in that DNA meeting to just perhaps share their experience as well. And Mary, I was wondering if at some point you might be able to chip in on that, because you've been very proactive in those meetings. I'm very grateful for the warming up the audience that you've done for us on those, because that has made a huge difference to how those events of those workshops have run. And I know we've got some other colleagues with us as well. So we just, as we move into a roundtable discussion, invite everybody to chip in. So Stephen, would you like to share your initial experiences of that, and perhaps some top tips that you perhaps give a team coming into a DNA to what to prepare for and the kind of things to think about?
Okay, excuse me. Reflecting on some of the postings in that shared Padlet, Andy, it's clear that some people already, I think, get this. They understand what learning design is. They're taking a learning design approach. They're taking that iterative approach to their own practice, realizing that this is going to take perhaps many iterations before you get to where you want to be. Those discussions with people who are taking that learning design approach already, they're very straightforward, and the discussion tends to be around how can I work in this particular little bit of niche? How can I improve around assessments? It's typically around assessment and feedback. There are some colleagues who advocate that transmission mode of education. You know, I transmit content, and that I find the conversation is a lot more difficult, because we're trying within a learning design approach to take a very different approach to education. So those discussions can be a bit more difficult because almost we need to find some common ground when we're approaching things like that. I'd reiterate what I said before, that this is a discussion that the DNA meeting. It can sound a little bit jargonistic, a little bit official, if you don't understand what it is we're trying to do here. As a facilitator, I'm going to come in to a course team, the subject matter of which I've probably got absolutely zero understanding of, but it's not about understanding the content that you're trying to deliver in a particular module or a particular course. It's about understanding your pedagogical approach. So those are the sorts of discussions we need to have within the DNA meeting. One question that's come up in Vivox, and I haven't yet encountered, and I think it's probably worth us thinking about, is the role of the individual. So someone has posted the question, you keep saying your team, and the DNA meetings I've had have been with teams, but this person said, I'm interested in what you can do to help me as an individual module coordinator. So I think there's something around this idea of the team-based approach when people are feeling as individuals delivering individual modules. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, Andy.
I think the one thing, and we've discussed this, haven't we, that I think when we come into a DNA meeting and we come into an Enable workshop, those meetings will generate a lot of information and that's the plan. The aim is that after you've come out of an Enable workshop, you will have lots of material to actually work with. And I think it is useful to have probably 1 or 2 contact points that is going to take that information away and share it. So it's in one place. The plan is also to provide you with an online canvas on which this information can be scanned, posted, and then shared with the wider team. So the idea is that the Enable provides a starting point from the Enable DNA. The Enable workshop provides a starting point. It will not do everything necessarily, and it's not intended to do everything. It's a starting point to give the team the confidence to go away and develop that process themselves. But we will give you the tools to enable that kind of like more asynchronous engagement with it, using something colleagues might have used it. Miro seems to be where we're heading, and that person who is that lead, we would probably ask to create a Miro account because it's free, and team member can then join that. So it's just that the importance of communication and coordination in the process, because we will be generating quite a lot of information. And while I'm here, if I may, Helen's asked a really good question about the subject expertise of that facilitation. I think you touched on it there, Stephen, that it's not so much about the expertise or subject expertise of the colleague that's running the Enable workshop. We're not here to answer all those subject specific questions. We're here to, within that Enable workshop, to help facilitate the discussions and to give you the structure, because as the colleagues who are the experts in the subject, you know the answers. We're just there to help facilitate and give you the resources to structure something that draws on your own expertise, subject knowledge around what you need to be kind of like delivering. I think
Can I just say, Andy, just to back up that point, absolutely that's the case. We're not there as facilitators to provide answers. We're there to facilitate discussions, and there will be a gap of, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 weeks between that initial DNA meeting and the workshop, in part for the facilitator to get his or her head around all of that information that hopefully will be coming from the team. Some of that information might be quite difficult. There may be some difficult aspects to a module or a course that need to be discussed, and the facilitator will need to get to grips with that. So we need, I think, that period of 2, 3, 4 weeks just to digest what might be going on.
Okay, just looked at David's question, and I think what I'd like to do to answer that one is, I know that we've got some colleagues in the room that I've done a DNA meeting, and I think Alex is with us, Sabine. Hi, Alex. And we've also got Jody with us. I'm not sure Richard, is Richard with us? I'm not sure. Alex and Jody, Could you perhaps talk about the meeting that we had on Monday with you? Because I think that's a nice example of you weren't quite sure. You had some questions. You certainly had a question around, oh, we've got lots of shared modules. How are we going to tackle that? Would you like to give your take on the meeting and where we ended up and what you're going to do next?
Yeah, I think for us, it was really good to end up talking about how we could not separate our courses out so much, because our childhood studies courses share so many modules, and those modules are so multifaceted, and we have to work with lots of different teams and professional services. So I think what was really handy to come out of it was actually how we can get a little bit more sort of communication across the team as to what we're covering and where, but also how we can look at those modules in a bit of a holistic way across different courses. So instead of looking at it as a sort of course by course level, it was more of a shared module level. And it took us a little while to get to that, Andy, I think, didn't it? Because we were looking at it differently and stuff. And so it was when we sort of said, look, there are 3 core things across our undergraduate provision, years 1, year 2 and year 3. So what is it that we can do for each of those specific core modules that can really benefit from this process? I think that's where we ended up. Is that was the sort of thing?
Well, I hope, well, exactly. In the spirit of a DNA meeting where you lead, I'll take that. Thanks very much. Yeah, because that was the point, that you generated that response. I helped kind of like navigate you there, and I think we ended up with something you were happy with. Alex, would you like to chip in on that? Because I know that you had some views on the core modules and how we support that.
No, I think it was actually really useful, because I think, you know, it's often difficult and challenging to kind of create long-lasting, impactful change in a course. And I think, you know, when you met with us, it was an opportunity to really reflect from outside the box, so to speak. So it enabled a bit more clarity and streamlining of how we'd actually approach it. And then that, I think what was really helpful was just simplifying the approach and then selecting 3 modules, which we agreed there was a strong rationale to kind of apply this review process through. And I think it's possibly the robustness and the kind of agreed team approach and the sensitivity around it that will work, that we're quite excited about moving forward, because, you know, we were already on trajectories that we wanted to be on the sort of right track. But I think this will just give us that robust kind of consistent approach, which isn't just within the school, all the faculty would actually cross the university eventually as well, which is really exciting. And I think, you know, this hearing people say about multidisciplinary approaches and hearing from people who are perhaps not content level experts is actually really, really helpful. And I know some of the most valuable bits and pieces I've picked up has actually been from speaking to people from other schools and other faculties about how they do things, because it really does open your eyes about what's possible. So I really do hope that the enable process will enable that moving forward. Thanks.
Yes, you have a stamp. You've been enabled. That's the. I think the other thing that came out of the workshop on Monday, if I may, was we have a set of resources in the toolkit and a structure of how a workshop could run. But it came very clear from Alex and Jodie's workshop on Monday that we just needed to perhaps reorder how the Enable workshop ran, because there was a particular mapping exercise that they needed to do first. That seemed to be the most valuable element of the Enable workshop for them. So we would put that first, you know. So this is the whole point, that we have a structure, but it's an indicative structure. And we've got lots of tools and we've got lots of resources in that Enable workshop. But how we deploy them and how they're structured and and the time we have comes from the DNA meeting to start. Sarah, you're not expecting this one, so this is I do apologize to start with, but you have sat in on these DNA meetings, and Sarah comes along to the DNA meetings and helps facilitate and take notes, and we also record them so we can come back to it. But as an observer, Sarah, can I possibly ask you to perhaps, what do you think's worked, looking there as almost like a neutral third party, and where it's worked and perhaps not so worked, and what advice would you give to those colleagues coming in?
I think it might have been Amy that said before, I think it's giving colleagues that time when they probably wouldn't have it, you know, at busy periods of the year, where they get to come together and actually have the chance to sit down and discuss their course. And in some of the DNAs, we've had people that aren't too au fait with what the process is, and hopefully this event will change that. but it's kind of giving them more information to kind of calm them that, you know, as we said, this isn't just a process, you know, where we're going to kind of question you on what's going on. It's a fun process. It's something to help staff and bring them together to discuss what they would like their courses to be. But as I say, obviously from the outside, it's just nice to see colleagues coming together and getting that chance to discuss things that they might not have had the chance to.
Thank you, Sarah. Mary, would you like to, could you offer, you've sat in on a few now, would you like to share your view and how you think they've run, and the kind of like the critical success factors to think about before we have the meeting?
The ones that we've done so far, we haven't used the pro forma, but I think that will help because it's almost like a scene setting. People were coming to the DNA meetings and not too sure what it was about, not too sure what Enable was about. So the pro forma will help that the people that are at the meeting might have some questions in advance, and how we can respond to those questions during the DNA meeting. I think it's also really important that staff don't think about this is something they're being forced to do. We want to encourage module coordinators, course leads to engage in it and support them as much as possible the whole of the way through this process.
Thank you. Lee, I think you've done a DNA as well. Would you like to share your experiences?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. So I did a DNA meeting as a participant because I'm the module coordinator and I deliver a third year civil engineering module. I'm the only person that delivers the module. So what we did is we partnered up with a colleague that teaches a different module in a different school, and I think we weren't really sure how that was going to work, but it was really beneficial to have a second person with a different perspective in the DNA meeting. I think perhaps like some of our colleagues, I was slightly skeptical about the process, I must admit, going into it beforehand, but I actually found it to be a really positive experience. As people have already said, it's not a process where anybody tells you this is wrong with your module, this is what you need to change in your module. The DNA meeting, it started with the module coordinators sort of giving a very brief overview of their module and us suggesting what we thought currently worked very well with our modules and what we thought perhaps didn't work so well on our modules. So in the case of the module that I was taken through the DNA meeting, the thing I'm very pleased about is the feedback that I get from the students on the module. The issue I have on the module is not brilliant results at the end of the module from the students, which is affecting the poor progression rates. And it was just really helpful to have a conversation with colleagues about that and to sort of share experiences. And since the DNA meeting, we've not had the full Enable workshop yet, but since the DNA meeting, it's already got me thinking in quite a constructive way about what I could change on my module to help address the progression issue, which relates to engagement. But no, it was very good.
Thank you very much. It's really valuable. Thank you. One last colleague that I know that I'm hoping is here. I've looked at the list and I've got too many little mini screens, so I can't find her per se. But Fiona Woody, are you there? Calling Fiona Woody.
It's Wadey, and yes, Wadey. I am here.
There we go, Fiona. Thank you. Now, I did my first DNA meeting with you a while back.
Yes.
Would you like to share your experiences, Fiona, and what's happened since? And I think we're about to do your Enable not very soon, aren't we?
Yes. So I think, yeah, you're right that we were the first meeting, and it was myself, Mary Watkins, who's somewhere on here, and Gemma, who is our e-learning coordinator. I personally had no idea really what to expect, and I think Gemma and Mary knew more than I did, but we are in the process of kind of relooking at all of our modules in our program area, and this is just kind of the perfect thing for us, essentially. We know that there's things that could be done better, and that the initial meeting that we had, I felt that I came away knowing a bit more what to expect. Obviously, we've opened up our first work, I'm calling it a workshop, I'm not sure that's the right word, and we've got next week, 2 weeks time, there'll be more people, and they weren't all initially in that DNA meeting. But I think it's made it clear for me, at least. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit here. I found it helped me know what to expect, which helps us support our colleagues who are going to be doing this process with us.
Thank you, Fiona.